Hey, it's the Spark of Madness. I'm Matt, and hey, Ben's back.
Hey, we found you.
Yeah, where'd you go, Ben?
You're supposed to cut me off.
Oh, see, I don't like to do that. I'm sorry. I don't like to be rude.
You've missed so much. Aaron has changed. He won't play to the joke.
I've changed.
Yeah, and that's Aaron over there.
Mm-hmm.
Ben, while you were out last week, you missed a riveting 45-minute episode?
it was 40 minutes.
40-minute episode?
Yeah, it was
With two people.
Aaron and I talking about
we
Kung
really
Pao.
got to the nitty-gritty.
We did.
We got into it, and it was a very satisfying conversation.
We're doing an episode a little bit earlier than a week later, but we're 5 days. I'm counting it as 5 days that we have failed to bring Steve Odenkirk onto the show.
Well, we still haven't hit 1 million subscribers. So, Steve Odenkirk, if you're out there, we love you. We want you on the show.
That's right.
Did he do Dumb and Dumber?
He wrote Ace Ventura.
That's
Ace
right.
Ventura, yeah.
That's right.
He's a funny guy.
But this week we are doing
Kind of a throwback?
my favorite. Maybe this could end up being one of my favorite episodes because, it kind of comes on the heels of in anticipation of the new Spider-Man movie coming out, Far From Home, which is coming out this weekend. But also, this movie dropped on Netflix, came out in 2018, and we're doing Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. And Aaron has lifted his embargo for this, so it's a big deal.
One last time.
I relented on this one occasion because Matt likes it so much.
Yeah, so I hope it was worth it. If you're new to this, at the very end, we'll give you our ratings, and hopefully Aaron will say that this was worth the embargo being lifted. But we'll hold off. We'll hold off. Ben, give people a brief description if they haven't seen this movie.
Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is a 2018 American computer-animated superhero film directed by Bob Persichetti, Peter Ramsey, and Rodney Rothman, from a screenplay by Phil Lord and Rothman and story by Lord. The movie follows teen Miles Morales, who becomes the Spider-Man of his reality, crossing in his path with 5 counterparts from another dimension to stop a threat for all realities. It grossed over $375 million worldwide against the $90 million budget. It received critical praise and won numerous awards, including Best Animation Feature at the 91st Academy Awards.
Very good, Ben. You're getting good at that.
Good, yeah. I thought you might pivot halfway through into Green Goblin voice, but
Oh, we have a whole show.
Night's still young. Yeah.
Don't give it away.
I actually forgot about it. I did that.
All right. So, Aaron,
Yes.
first reactions. Having just watched this movie for the very first time, after lifting the embargo, what did you think?
Ultimately,
I'm on pins and needles.
okay. Ultimately, it was a positive experience. Is that enough to say for now, or should I go further?
Did you get heartburn?
Only when I eat cinnamon Pop-Tarts.
Oh.
You ever had those before?
They're so good.
I like them.
They're
but
missing out, though.
enough about Pop-Tarts.
Enough. So give me a little bit more. When you say it's a positive, like, I guess what comes to mind, given that you have stopped watching superhero movies, now all of a sudden you're going to watch one. Was this different? Was it kind of the same for you as other
Absolutely. It was different from other superhero movies. Not like night and day, but different enough that it felt like, yeah, there was plenty of reason to make this movie. It was not the same as the others, and I didn't feel like I was watching the same thing over and over again, like I usually do. Fair?
Well, I absolutely think so, given people already know if you follow along to the post from last year, what my rating is for this movie. So
Was it a 10?
I'm not going to spoil for this podcast, but yes. I love this movie. It was so good. And I'd only seen it once before rewatching it over the weekend. Ben, is this the second time you've watched it, or had you seen it more in
Second
between?
time.
Okay. Go back to the very first time you watched it. What was your instant reaction?
Deer in headlights.
Just silence. Okay.
It was good.
All
I
right.
loved it and I enjoyed it.
Okay.
I thought it was a perfect movie.
What stands out to you when you say it's a perfect movie? What stands out?
Well, my first reaction is this. I grew up like in the 90s and I watched a lot of cartoons. And one in particular on Saturday morning was the Spider-Man cartoon. Not only did it remind me of that, which was that cartoon was put together by the people at Marvel. So there's a lot of like pulling from the comics and stuff, and they did a really good job with it. And they went to different like alternate realities and all these different things that like are far out there, with stuff. And they would never do that in a movie, but they did it with this movie. And like the Kingpin was the main villain in the Spider-Man.
Finally.
In the Spider-Man cartoons, even though he's the main villain in Daredevil too. But it reminded me a lot of the charm of the Spider-Man cartoon in the 90s that I thought was one of the best cartoons.
Do you say it's the way you're describing it, which I think this movie it applies to this movie, is that the it's sort of like when you take like these dampening, like I'm thinking of a superhero where they have these like power dampening things. It just like genericizes the movie. Like this goes into kind of weird places that the old cartoon used to do.
Yeah, so it did that, but the old cartoon wasn't that funny. It was kind of real serious.
It was pretty serious.
I think,
but this is hilarious.
I think the most
hilarious.
the clearest way to describe it, and I love the original Spider-Man movies too, but the best way I think to describe the differences is what they did with Green Goblin, who's like a very small minor part in this. But they made him this like huge flying monster thing.
You know why they did that though? Is because that's not our Green Goblin.
Right.
I know.
Yeah. And I think he existed in the comic books too.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying though is that they were willing to take.
They're willing to shake it up.
Yeah, like this metal suit human version that is on a space like a flying thing in the originals. They're going to use like an actual flying dragon lizard guy in this movie, which I think is kind of cool that they kick off the movie that way.
And they don't explain it. They're just like, we're already in it.
And you already know that's Green Goblin. Like you get it.
He calls him Norman. We get it.
Yeah.
And they did the Kingpin perfectly. Who was the voice of Kingpin?
I don't know.
It's the guy from Leif Schreiber.
Can you?
He's the guy. He has a show on Showtime. He's the hairy guy in the Wolverine movie. Why can't I think of his name? Ugh. He's like Wolverine's arch nemesis.
Sabretooth?
Sabretooth.
He's the voice. Like he's the voice of like the.
He's the latter Sabretooth.
So he's the voice. He's also the voice of the, like the.
Manchurian Candidate. He's in that too.
But he's also in the Omen remake.
Is he? I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't think I haven't seen that.
But he's the HBO voice for like all the specials.
Yeah.
Well, he really changed his
Ray
voice.
Donovan. God, that was it.
He really changed his voice a lot.
Yeah.
Matt, on the subject of voice, can you clear up a suspicion for me? Was Nick Cage the noir Spider-Man?
Yes.
Yes, he was.
Thought so.
Yeah, and it's perfect. And then John Mulaney was Peter Porker, Spider-Ham.
John Mulaney?
John Mulaney,
Yeah.
yeah.
Can someone remind me who that is?
He's a comedian.
Okay.
He's stand-up. Yeah.
And then Chris Pratt, right?
Chris Pine was
Chris
the
Pine
very
was the first Spider-Man.
Oh,
And the
Then
guy-
'cause I thought he did a good
Johnson.
job, whoever that was.
And their voices are similar enough that you couldn't tell, but like, it's pretty funny.
You mean Dumpy Spider-Man was a different voice?
Mm-hmm.
It sounded so similar.
Yeah.
It is a completely different voice.
Huh.
Yep.
Yeah,
It's cool.
which I think is cool.
Plus he was blonde.
So I also think this is really well written. This is really well put together. I don't know how long it take them to make this movie.
I know that they were in
Years? I don't
R&D
know.
for the art style for like a year before they even started making the movie.
Yeah, they patented it. I'm sure it was a while.
So
I think it said they started because it was Chris Miller and Phil Lord, and then ultimately Phil Lord wrote the story and the screenplay. But the two of them, Claudia with a Chance of Meatballs, and what was that other? They did the show
Last Man on Earth. I thought that show was great.
Last Man on Earth. They also did the history show on MTV that was animated. I am drawing a blank on everything.
Anyways,
but they're very funny and have an eye for animation. They were writing it together. I think it said in like 2014.
Well, you can okay. So we talk about in humor. Let's just talk about humor. A lot of movies and just riffed, and like it's funny when they're talking about it, but they don't even use the camera, in the medium of film for it. But they do it a lot. They understand the humor in the film of how to use cuts and whatnot to make it. But like one of my favorite examples of that in this movie, when he's at this, like he's trying to take the first jump for the first time, and he's going up the stairs, and the hero music is swelling, and it gets real big, and then it cuts, and he's like, no,
walking down the stairs,
and it's just visual. There's no dialogue.
And then outside, they show him. I think they then show him going back up when he picks the very obviously smaller building. Yeah.
That was well done because you don't always have to throw in a snarky comment.
No, and it's fun, like visual, and also like the fact that I don't know where these files are, so I'm taking the whole computer, and he's like, you get to take good news. You just we don't need the monitor.
Ben, are you telling me that the files are in the computer?
It's just a funny thing. It's a funny concept of like the trope of all spy movies where they're trying to get something. And it's like her desktop's a mess. I don't know where it is.
He's like, clean up your desktop, lady. And he just takes it.
And one line I think probably Aaron probably would have loved was I just watched it yesterday, and I forgot about this line. And Spider-Ham says, "That's all, folks." And he goes, Can he say that legally?
Is that
we're getting sued?
Can he say that legally? They broke the fourth wall.
No, what I liked was him handing the hammer to Miles and being like, "It fits in your pocket."
Can you float on the scent of a pie?
Can you float in the air with the smell of the pie? He's like John Mulaney's funny given the right circumstances.
Otherwise, terrible.
Well, like he had his own show once that wasn't very good.
That bombed. Yeah.
Was it the Mulaney Variety Hour?
I think it was.
I think
Delaney.
Was he Scottish?
I'm old Delaney. You get back in your cage. I'll hit you, my Shalani. I'm John Mulaney.
Get us on track.
Turdy.
I do think this movie, I guess this is where I'll go with this, is the best across the board, the best version of the best visualization of comic books that has happened before.
Yeah, sure.
Agreed. I agree.
Yeah.
I see no reason to disagree.
No, I think it's perfect.
The
It's a perfect blend of what a comic book and a movie together.
Yep.
With the thought bubbles, even that was humorous. Like so clever.
And the little motion lines they would add in, or the
ink
bagel,
dots,
like in the bagel.
Yeah, the ink dots.
Yeah. The way they shaded it with halftoning.
The one. This reminds the one failed attempt of that is the first Hulk movie.
Yeah, and there are parts of that that are pretty cool.
Yeah, but it just didn't work.
Yeah.
Compared to this movie.
It was more of an experiment.
This was like a holistic. The way they didn't overdo the idea of adding in the thought bubbles and the words and all that. They didn't overdo it.
No.
They spaced it out. They put it in the right moments. They didn't. It was almost like so subtle, but like when you think of it as a whole or in a given scene, it always textures everything because of how they worked it in so seamlessly. That at the start it's kind of like, oh, that's kind of cool, but then it's like the whole time they're kind of working it in very like specific parts to heighten what you're watching.
I mean, as far as the comic book shading thing goes, I would say that some of this movie doesn't go far enough, at least for my taste. Because sometimes it's very subdued, and sometimes it's way in your face, and I don't think that's a problem. I'm just saying maybe there were a couple of shots where they could have gone further. That's all.
I like the combined, like the explosions weren't like they were like more graphic art.
They had a lot of like just straight 2D,
and that's why like
flat.
the 2D characters, like the Spider-Ham and the Spider-Girl or the whatever.
You mentioned the fire, Ben.
The anime.
Yeah.
The fire. You're absolutely right. They did it as a very 2D effect, but like what bothered me, there was one thing in this movie that bothered me visually, and it was when they were doing smoke. It was just realistic smoke. And I was like, that doesn't.
I thought
fit.
the environment looked good though,
Yes, it did.
even though that was more realistic. Like I thought this was the best representation of New York to me because I've been in New York. You know, what I mean, this is the best representation of New York. It felt like the very beginning when they're establishing the world. It felt like New York, and like all the voice actors were great.
Yeah,
The dad was great. The uncle was great. Like it was believable, but it was still funny.
Yeah.
The relationship between each characters worked. Even like the four other
Other Spider-Man characters.
yeah, the three ones that are not in that much.
Yeah.
You cared about them, but they told enough to know. Like
Sure.
they weren't in it for that long, but it was perfectly put together there.
Yeah, everybody had kind of a there's no waste. I don't think there's any wasted time in the movie, and
you know what?
even like the moments where they're trying to build, like they obviously realize they're mostly comedic relief, but also reinforcing the multiverse thing. Like they don't waste time on it.
But everybody was
'cause they
comedic
know.
relief, which is crazy.
Well, yeah.
Except for everybody was funny in it. But
I just remembered the Rubik's Cube.
I'm taking this.
It's like, is it purple or is it?
He's guessing.
I don't understand it yet. But
He
I
did a
know.
good job. Like he did.
Yeah, Nick Cage. I keep telling people Nick Cage is good if you direct him well.
Absolutely. There's a movie called Tesk that he's in. He plays a Secret Service agent.
There's a fabulous film called Wicker Man.
We were
Have you
talking
heard of
about
that one?
Mandy right before the show started.
Oh.
The other thing that makes it such a good comic movie to me is that
The animators.
huh?
No, I'm sorry.
Is the action sequences. Like this movie has the better like action and like fight scenes and the choreography and the because they can do whatever they want is part of it.
They have more control.
And they can allow for more things to happen that it doesn't look ridiculous because everything's animated in this very stylized way. That I think these are better than just about any of the other.
And because it's so stylized, it
superhero movies.
sidesteps looking silly.
Right.
It's almost like you can't catch me, I'm a comic book. Which I think is a good thing, ultimately, because it means they can go hog wild.
Yeah, and I'm imagining it's not an action sequence, but the scene where he
no pun intended. They actually put a hog in it.
You know, I really didn't intend a pun, but now I see the pun.
yeah.
Huh, good snipe.
Because you wouldn't think that would work.
What?
Like having those other characters in there that are like blatantly totally
Well,
different.
I mean, with the multiverse thing, I can easily
yeah,
forgive
but
it.
but a lot of movies wouldn't take that risk.
I half expected,
they wouldn't.
since I
It's
during
kinda
the movie,
Guardians of the
I was
Galaxy a little.
expecting, I was almost expecting Spider-Man, Avengers Spider-Man to show up at some point.
I think there was talk. Someone told me that they were going to have all the Spider-Mans come in at one point. From that we know the Tom Holland, Andrew Garfield, and what's his name?
Toby?
Toby. All being there. Well, that would have been funny.
I wouldn't have thought it was dumb.
But technically, the Spider-Man that the fat out of shape Spider-Man is our Tobey Maguire.
Right.
Spider-Man.
See,
Yeah.
what I loved about this movie is that it was almost pretty much entirely independent of
Yes.
all the other things in Marvel's like
And
plans.
self-contained.
And yeah. The only thing that they reference, to me, I think this is the perfect superhero movie. It's like the antidote to all the overkill,
It kind of felt like that.
of just inundated with superhero movies all the time. This was like the jolt, the adrenaline shot, Pulp Fiction, that it simultaneously felt like, here, we're going to give you fresh new stuff, while almost like admitting like we're kind of sick of when they showed the Spider-Man 3 dancing, they're like, yeah, we don't talk about that.
Talk about it. I love that movie.
And then they had the line about with great power comes. They only said it one time, I think, and it got cut off. And he's like, "Don't you finish that?" Like, no, this is a new movie. But it also was still somehow like at the same time, while trying to be totally different, like made me so nostalgic for just comic books and super. Like for some reason, it captured all of that for me, like in a way that none of the other movies are doing anymore. That made me appreciate. Why I liked it why comic book movies in the first place, but also even all the other Marvel movies that are overkill or like I'm sick of. For somehow this movie like just resolved all of it for me.
More importantly, this is a subjective thing to say, sure, but to me, it felt like the people making this movie actually wanted to make this movie, and it wasn't just an obligation.
Mm-hmm.
That's
And
what I got out of
it
it.
wasn't someone looking over their head saying, "Don't paint out of the lines."
They went out of the lines a lot in this.
I know.
There was lots of color stripping.
What is that? That clearly is a blue. 2 is a blue.
You know it's true because it rhymes.
Paint by numbers, boy.
That's what a lot of those Marvel
How do
movies
you
feel
screw
like.
up a frozen pizza?
What did you guys think of? So Ben was mentioning all the different character dynamics. I guess, is there anything kind of specific? Because I thought this movie did an origin story without, almost without telling you it was an origin story. Like, it just kind of happened.
I could have done.
Go ahead.
I was knowing nothing about this movie. I was expecting it to kind of throw us in where Miles is already Spider-Man, and I didn't get that, and I was a little disappointed. But it's not bad. I'm just sick of origin stories. That's all.
Yeah. A black Spider-Man?
Yeah, he's been in the comics for years.
I know. I just wanted
I belong to a certain society.
I just wanted to do this, the Blazing Saddle reference. That's all. That's all I wanted to do.
I mean, I think even though it was like they showed, and it's like a very familiar, gets bitten by a spider, and it's a little bit different. I think that's what this whole movie ultimately was about, was showing the repetitiveness of it, that like it's the same in each universe kind of, and that I mean, the thing about Spider-Man is he's not like he gets granted powers, but he's like a normal kid, and he has like normal kid. That's the kind of allure of his whole.
I also thought it was cool when the beginning, when they killed Spider-Man, like we get a taste of what the world would find out who his identity is after the fact, like that loss.
Also, it sets things up.
Cool.
So more importantly to me is that it makes the superheroes not invulnerable. We actually know that they can die. So each
Like there's
punch,
stakes every time.
each time someone gets punched by Big Boy Kingpin, I know his name. I blanked. It feels like it could be trouble for them.
We can call him Big Boy from now on if you want.
I think that's a restaurant chain. I shouldn't go there.
I mean, we haven't even mentioned his character design. Talk about a risk to go with something so. Like,
I wouldn't call it a risk. I would call it.
He looks like that a lot in the comic book. A little
Well,
bit.
let's just say it. He's comically oversized.
Yeah.
And that was pun intended.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed it a lot because, okay, this is going to be a big art thing for me. This movie is so heavily stylized that it made me happy because you get a lot more you get a lot more mileage out of expressions and being able to stretch things around, squash things. Stylization creates more character a lot, in my opinion, and it allowed for much more expressive stuff.
So what was the frame rate they used there?
It was a mix, which is partly what bothers me.
So there was like the stop motion feel to it, and then it was like almost smooth at sometimes, right?
It changes here and there, but for the most part, like the camera motions seem to be at full frame rate, and then the character motions seem to be at half that.
Interesting.
Which bothers me, but I know that it's fine.
It was more of a creative choice that you just didn't like.
Well, I could go either way on it. Sometimes I thought it was weird looking.
Yeah.
Other times I thought it looked great. But maybe it's just something I need to adjust to.
I'm trying to look at the '90s cartoon.
Because when you mix frame rates, it can go wrong. I don't know that this movie did anything wrong. It's just it was a lot to take in.
Well, just because we're kind of towards the end
We're
here,
not done yet.
What, I guess, if you had to pick
You're not
anything,
going anywhere,
if you had to pick
Spider-Man.
something that would be a flaw or something that stands out, is there anything? What would you say?
Mainly that what you have some sequences where I've already mentioned this. I think they could have gone further in some areas. You have some sequences where the stylization is so over the top that I think it's great. It's fun to look at. It expresses a lot, and it's different from every other movie. Like rant incoming. A long time ago.
2,
when
1.
Okay, rant go. A long time ago, when CGI movies were more of a novelty and they weren't coming out all the time, you didn't have to worry about every movie looking the same. And now that pretty much every studio just adopts the Pixar method. It's very samey all the time, and everything is so dull.
That's
It
probably
looked good long ago, but now everything looks the same. I'm bored.
Yeah.
And this movie dares to break the mold, and bravo!
Exactly, and I thought of watching it too recently. It reminds me of treating animation like an art piece, like Disney did, and back in the day.
They weren't painting by numbers, as you said.
No,
they tried something.
Let's explore the medium. That we're going to do something different.
Let's try to be artistic for once.
yeah.
Let's invent. I mean, not that other studios aren't inventing stuff, but they invented like animation to create the look they did.
They did, and remember that Paperman short that Disney did? That looked great.
Yeah.
And there was talks about doing a whole feature movie about that, but they never did. It's like
maybe they still will.
But
would have messed it up.
Just do it. Do it. Do a whole movie like that. It's a cool.
Oh, I guess if your argument is to do I like
not Spider-Man. I'm talking about like their own movie. Like
any
take the
old
risk.
movie.
Like Disney didn't take the risk. Nope. We're gonna paint by numbers. We're gonna re-release the old classics.
Yeah. And the thing about this is,
it's an art piece.
It has Here's how I would put it.
It's like Snow White.
It feels like it has soul. Feel me on that? Yeah. Like, used to be you could tell who made a movie by looking at it because we had differences. Like, for example.
I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Yeah. You're smelling what I'm stepping in. DreamWorks early on had more of a realistic look to it, and Blue Sky, the guys who did Ice Age, they went way heavy on the squashing and stretching.
The rubber earring.
Yeah, and then Pixar was kind of somewhere in between, and you could sort of pick out who was making what. Now everything looks the same, and then we get this, and it makes me happy.
Well, ever since DreamWorks did entered the computer animation world, I think they were trying to copy Pixar. Where before, like
they didn't. They do it now, I would say, but early on they were pretty different.
Shrek was very Pixar, right?
I don't know. It was.
Ants wasn't. Ants was a little dark.
Shrek was. I wouldn't class it as a Pixar ripoff.
But this is the same studio that could have done Popeye.
Yes, I'm still mad about that.
Well, they're the collab. Yeah,
they could have done Popeye.
They're good.
They dropped
their
Popeye
animation.
for the emoji movie.
I know. They could have done Popeye, but
I'm seething.
Yeah.
Seething.
Yeah.
So I led
once in a while, Sony does something good.
I led that question with what's a flaw, potential flaw. We ended up like
I said that they didn't go not far enough
Okay.
with the art style and choices.
I was going to say
I don't know.
the one part that stood out to me was actually the very end when it came to the over stylization was the very end fight scene where they're in the collider zone.
And
it
it
felt
was-
just always abstract behind them.
Yeah. I had no problem with
I
that.
kind of like that though.
I had no issue.
I
thought about
I thought
that
it was
too.
kind of like a I don't know.
Cop-out?
It was not a cop out, but when it's like all of a sudden they're in this room, like I lost sense of the scope of what was happening. That
And I
where
think
the
that's
space
okay.
they were in, and
That was the intention, but
I don't
you're
know if
really
it's the
focused on the
intention.
characters, which
Yeah.
is fine.
That's
but-
exactly what I was about to say.
Yeah.
It lets you focus on what matters.
Yeah, which I get, but there were a couple shots in there where it was like, oh, they're on this thing, and all of a sudden you look over, and somehow his dad had wandered into the building. The building's not connected to anything anymore, but he's just kind of floating there. There were a couple like kind of like weird shots that up until that point I didn't even think about. That's the only thing I can think of.
well, one
for me,
thing I like and I dislike at the same time. I guess this is the problem. One of my biggest things I love about the Rocketeer was that he was fumbling around trying to figure out how to fly a jetpack. And I thought that was realistic and kind of funny. And they did the same thing with Miles Ness. Like he just really did. He was awkward, trying to do all these things and fumbling around.
Yes.
And then he figures it out, which I like at the end. But he figures it out so quickly
At the end?
at the very end.
Oh,
That's
just
'cause he just
his
had to
extra
believe in
powers. You mean
himself.
the extra powers?
Which I like that too because that's the payoff too that we get too. But like he's perfect. He knew exactly what to do.
Well, no,
and I like that, but didn't build.
It came immediately after that really emotional scene where his
With
dad,
Dad, yeah.
where they did the split.
I guess,
and
yeah.
So
Well, it couldn't have happened too fast because he had time to make that new suit.
That's true.
Yeah.
And I like that. I like that.
the song build up into when you see the new suit, and then he jumps off the building upside down, and then you see him swinging around. I'm getting goosebumps. I've got goosebumps right now.
It was
thinking
good.
Of it.
It was good.
Oh.
Even like Kingpin's motivation and emotional connection that you had.
Yeah.
They miss his family.
Yep.
You know, and the thing is, I watched the Spider-Man cartoon so much that I knew all this stuff, and I think that's why I liked it too.
I don't have a lot of bad things to say about this movie, man.
All right. Do you want to do our ratings then?
I even think the one thing that is the most glaring is the anime girl, but she worked. It was so funny, and I always think of you because you love animes.
Yeah.
When she's like, it shows the underneath the thing, and she's eating her snacks.
Yeah. It's just like,
I was like, that. It was totally like they obviously knew what they were doing.
I don't dislike anime. I own one or two.
Oh, I don't dislike it. I'm saying like, it
No,
worked,
I'm just saying, what am I, chopped liver?
Well, and they also, just like with Spider-Ham, they kind of adapted the animation style whenever they did like a solo cutscene for them.
Right. Good stuff.
Yeah, and so they blended a lot of different types for this movie.
And that scene was funny.
Yeah.
Like the little things like that is brilliant to me.
Yeah, there's a lot
They're
of
all, like, going together.
little details, like little moments that they like.
It's well thought out.
Yeah.
Which I think because it's an animation, because they had more freedom probably too. They took their time and figure out movies are made so
They
quickly.
didn't rush
now.
it.
They didn't rush it. They took their time.
And if they did it really fast, they did a good job. I don't know which happened.
Well, they put a lot of time in the story, and that's why Pixar always has a good, slate of movies, is because they take their time in writing the stories and figuring out. Like, we had to animate all this stuff, so we don't have the lecture. It's expensive to do all this stuff, so we have to really put a lot of production and pre-planning.
Yeah.
Sure.
Which they don't do much anymore in movies. They do, but not really. There's a lot of
There's a lot of crunch.
well, there's a lot of that, and there's also like, oh, we got the reshoots. And they're counting, and that's a normal thing.
just throw
They
it in.
plan for the
Yeah.
reshoots
Yeah,
now.
and it never used to be.
Well, like
You know?
like X-Men, the new X-Men Dark Phoenix. I guess they just redid the entire ending. Like they did a bunch of and like that. When we think of reshoots, it's sometimes like, oh, we got to fix that little flub, or that line isn't working as well, or it was confusing, so let's change, or let's add a scene because people aren't following. Now it's like remake 20 minutes of the movie real quick because
That is not sustainable.
Like it's entire surgery.
You want to crash the movie industry? That's how you do it.
All right. Who wants to go
Ratings?
first? Let's do our ratings.
Okay. I can go first if you like.
Or why don't I go first? Because people know mine.
Okay. Go for it.
So I gave this a 10 out of 10. Even the like little things, nitpicking just because we have to, it's like it's negligible to me. For me, like I said, this movie is like the antidote to all of the like more stuff.
Agreed.
But I think, and we already mentioned how it's like, for me, the perfect encapsulation of not just the comic book art style, but like why we like that stuff. That it has like the escapism stuff, but also the whole multiverse thing. It's not only are all of the characters, you know how much I like characters with good arcs. Like each one has like a little thing. Like each one has like a thing.
Like Noah, I love his arc.
Yeah. Two of everything. No, but like even Gwen Stacy, like the things that they bring in with their like origin stories and the reasons they're so like their loss. Each one comes into it with loss that impacts their character that then they work through by the end of the movie. What I like so much about this with the multiverse thing is that with superhero comics, it's like I connect with this superhero because that could be me. Like sometimes, like a lot of people, especially when you're younger, you're like, oh, I want to be that person. With Spider-Man and these, it's like they basically acknowledge like all of these people have their own like little origin stories that it's the like almost normal part that what makes you unique is what like the catchphrase is what makes you different is what makes you Spider-Man. And I think like all of that, how it all wove in together, I liked.
They did a good job with that, but I also
very
think that's in the nature of Spider-Man himself. That's why he's a popular character, is because he's not a millionaire. He's not a super, like he's still vulnerable. He's not like Superman,
Right.
But he just, and he has his real life.
Right.
And I think that's why he's so relatable. And they did that well in the first two movies, and they did that well in the comic books.
But
and
then
stuff.
they show all these different iterations of the same kind of template, which I think is so like you can connect to that like even more. I think.
Well, I connected the most to Spider-Ham.
You did.
Yes, because Ben is a ham.
So yeah, I loved.
That's great.
I thought every art, story, character, everything, music, everything about it. 10.
Ben, before you give your rating, we have someone else named Ben in the comments saying, "Where's your Spider-Man T-shirt, Ben?" I think you failed somebody.
Oh my god, I don't have one. I outgrew it.
He's called you out specifically.
It's
for the
probably somebody I
Spider-Man shirt.
know.
There's a Ben on Ben action.
Yeah.
Maybe a.
Is this your alternate reality person?
Who is this? Who is this man? What sort of devil is he to
Yeah.
have me caught in a trap and tell me to change my Spider-Man
While
shirt?
you're-
I need to get one.
Tell me to change
Okay.
my tea.
Do you want to go next?
I'm sorry I don't have a Spider-Man shirt.
Yeah.
Whoever you are,
Anywho,
keep watching. I give it a 9 out of 10 or 9.5 out of 10. It was pretty good. Done.
fair.
No, I thought, like I said before, the way it was well thought out. It was definitely a crafting kind of movie. It was definitely like an art piece to me.
It felt more like they weren't just
No, it's
slapping something
It's
together.
the reason I love Jim Henson. It's the reason I love Walt Disney. Is that like it wasn't commercially driven.
The soul factor.
No.
Yes. All right.
Not commercially. That's a great point. Aaron.
How to rate this movie? Because I really enjoyed it, and I would even go as far as to say that I would watch it again.
Me too. I'm gonna
Yeah.
watch it again.
Because there was a lot to take in. I might have missed a few things. Now, you guys have given it very high ratings. 9 and 10. Those are incredible ratings. I will not poo-poo your ratings, but I respect this movie so much that I will rate it on par with the big dogs, and I will give it a 7. Not because I think it's a bad movie, but I don't think that the story does anything that's too amazing. It's the story's not bad. It's just not groundbreaking. Know what I mean?
Yeah. But it works though.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So when I rate this with the big dogs, like Godfather, I'd come up with like a 7.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm trying to give a very objective view.
He's rating with the big dogs.
The big dogs.
So like you're doing what
We gotta
Matt
go-
does,
we gotta
and
go to
not
Big
the
Boy?
way we do it. Like I'm not rating. If I'm gonna rate with the big dogs,
Well,
it's up there. Yeah, it's up there.
I'm rating it with the big dog.
okay, that's fine. I'm not saying your rating's bad.
But I still love the first Spider-Man movie. I love that
so
movie.
good. It's so good.
Spider-Man.
And Spider-Man
we go.
coming
Slate.
up to play.
And again, and again,
If
and
you
again.
waited until the very end of the episode for the voice.
Virginia.
All right, so next week I'm not going to be here.
Godspeed, Spider-Man.
You guys are still kind of sorting it out.
We're
I
doing
think it'll be a
something involving
surprise.
bears, I
Yeah.
think.
I think we might do the Care Bears Adventure in Wonderland.
You know,
Yes, I think that's
because that's our
back-
type of
back-
thing.
yeah,
classic.
It's a classic TV special.
Yeah.
Cartoon
So
featuring the
definitely,
Care Bears in Wonderland.
so definitely tune in for that. I will
This is no
not,
joke.
I will
though.
not
This is
be
no
here.
joke.
We're not
We're gonna
funning
do
you.
the Care Bears in Wonderland.
Yeah.
Where are my socks?
All right. Tune in next week for what is it? Care Bears in Wonderland?
Care Bears in Wonderland.
Care Bears Adventure in Wonderland.
All right. Until
Perfect.
next time.
All right.